All right, I'm here. I should have asked this before I started recording, but people can hear how dumb I am. Is your last name is pronounced Bolof or Baloff, or how do you pronounce it?
Bolof, like
That's what I figured.
like
Okay,
a
I just wanted to
bowl
make
off.
sure. Yeah, I should have asked that if I was a professional before we started recording, but we're
Oh,
just
you're
going to leave
fine.
that in there. It's fine. But I'm here with Sasha Bolof, who is an indie, I would consider like indie rock singer songwriter extraordinaire, from Los Angeles, correct?
Correct.
And we're talking about your upcoming record that is coming out in August.
August 9th.
It's yes, August 9th, titled Tabitha. That's the title of the album. You were nice enough to send it over to me ahead of time. I listened through it a couple different times. Absolutely loved it. Loved the
Awesome.
variety in
Awesome. Thank you.
it. Loved that it went from everywhere from very like kind of stripped back, guitar singer songwriter moments to like to some pretty pounding parts, at least in the instrumentals, and the melodies are super catchy and everything in between. So I'm excited to have you
Appreciate
on.
it.
I think I asked this before we started recording, but how are you doing today?
Oh, I'm doing great. Just another sunny day in Los Angeles, and just fed my cat, and yeah, just chilling, as they say.
Yeah, I've been able to visit California, never Los Angeles, but San Diego, and a few different times, and it's like so cliche to say, but God, it's just I don't know. The summer is something special there. I'm jealous every single
Right.
time I talk to someone from California until
I
they talk
mean,
about the rent, maybe.
right. I mean, and I'm actually, full disclosure, I'm actually like not from LA, and it's actually part of the reason why I moved to Los Angeles was because of the weather. I'm actually from Seattle, Washington,
Oh, okay.
which is only like I would say Seattle, Washington is probably the prettiest city in the world between the months of June and August, and besides those months, it's like gray and dreary. And growing up in the Pacific Northwest, you kind of get used to it, but it broke me a couple years ago, so I had to move.
I mean, I get it. I've always thought, living in the Midwest, you think everywhere a lot of the time is better, but
Right.
I've always thought I would like the Pacific Northwest because of like the gray, dreary, rainy weather. It's like fits my depressed personality, but
Right.
having that like day in and day out, that can get to anybody. I think for
Yeah.
sure.
And I think what really did it was like I was I've worked most of my adult life in grocery stores, and
Mm.
during that time I was working at a food co-op, and it was the pandemic, and I had to, it was at a time when like we were still not being masked. We didn't know like what to do. We had like crowded stores, couldn't leave, so I had to work in an environment where like we didn't know like if we were going to get COVID. I had to go home. I couldn't see anybody, and it was just like a really awful time. And I told myself, I was like, anytime I'm able to leave, I'm going to leave, and I did.
Yeah, makes absolute sense. Yeah, I'd want to get the fuck out after that too, especially
Right.
yeah, working at I talked to one of the previous episodes I did with somebody from Toronto. Great punk rock band if you're into like politically charged music, Cruel Hope. He had a similar story where he was like, but it was like even worse where he wasn't even working at a grocery store where it would actually be like, you understand that this, we could have a whole conversation about how shitty,
Right.
those companies were to people and all those things, but it is like a necessity, right? It is like a
Right.
necessary thing for people to get groceries. He was working at like a music store, and they dubbed it
Oh my god.
as an essential worker during COVID. And it's like, God,
Right.
man, what the fuck, But I
Yeah.
digress from that. I'm happy to have you on. I thought what we would do
Thank
today,
you.
obviously, is go back. Some of what you're talking about coming from Seattle, which
Mhm.
Seattle area at least, which is well renowned for its music culture and music scene.
Yeah.
Kind of go back as far as we can to what got you first started in music, what got you to start making and writing your own music, inspirations, all the good stuff, and then maybe do a deep dive on your upcoming record, which the recorded and edited and spliced in version of this episode will be out the week that the record comes out. But the first question I kind of ask people when we get going here, just to kind of get where your head's at with music you listen to, and maybe what some maybe someone like me that mostly listens to hardcore and metalcore and stuff like that might hear about some new artists from different genres or whatever the case may be. What have you been listening to a lot lately? What would be on like your on repeat if you listen to Spotify or the likeness of what have been some artists or some records or whatever you've been listening to a lot lately?
All right. Well, let me pull it up. Actually,
Yeah.
I would say, the first thing I would say is the new single from. Let me pull it up real quick. Blah blah blah. GRCG. My friend Justin. He I think a lot of people know him from his band Dream Decay.
Okay.
He has a new record coming out on Sub Pop, and they dropped their first single a few weeks ago, and it bangs. It's like super cool. Like he comes from like a very like hardcore like punk background, and so it's like doing that with like kraut and like also like there's like a lot of like Latin inspired percussions and stuff like that. It's super cool shit. It's like it's my favorite thing right now is JRCG.
You said it's JRCG. I'm gonna look that up right now and put that
Yeah,
in the notes
they're
for when
awesome,
this gets released.
and they have a
Uh,
record out as well, and that one's also great. And yeah,
yeah, I'm gonna have to check this band out.
they're
That sounds
awesome.
right up my alley. I love
They're amazing.
I love sort of when there's these people that come from hardcore or punk or heavier music, and then you throw out some of the other things that are influenced in it, and you just get like I don't know some of the most unique but still like casual listeners can
Right,
really enjoy it. It's not super avant-garde necessarily,
right.
but like there's a lot of really cool interesting influences in it. I'll definitely have to check this out. I followed it so I
Yeah.
wouldn't forget. Awesome.
Yeah, and I think I love and like Brian Cook, the bassist Brian Cook, who's been in bands like Botch and These Arms Are Snakes and Russian Circles. He said on a
Mhm.
podcast once that he just loves bands that have like a punk background because I
Yeah.
feel like no matter what genre you do after that, it kind of like your punk background kind of influences like what you do. So like whether it be you're like an you're a country singer or
Mhm.
you're doing like neoclassical music, if you had a punk background it kind of like shapes that sound, and I feel like it's just more interesting to listen to somebody with that kind of background.
Yeah, even when it's maybe like a more laid back genre or subgenre of music, they've got
Oh yeah,
a little bit of the edge stays in there. No, you're not
right.
quite sure what it is, whether it's the lyrics or the delivery, but yeah, you can kind of feel the difference for sure. I absolutely agree with that. That's such a good point. Well, thanks for going over that. It gives me every
Yeah,
single time I do this, I end up finding at least one artist I check out. So it just gives me more homework for more bands to listen to. But I love that. Um,
yeah.
so going from that, then kind of go back as far as you can for me, and just tell me where music first became a big part of your life. Did you grow up in a musical family? Did it come from school? Did it come from friends? Did it come from yeah, like the emo kid playing trumpet next to you that got you into some music, like in marching band or something? Like
Right.
what first got you into music and making a big part of your life?
So oddly enough, I think the first time I ever really thought about music in a way that like really affected me was so like I grew up in the 90s, and I watched The Simpsons like religiously, and I was obsessed with Lisa Simpson, and I was obsessed with that she played the saxophone. So
Mhm.
I think I was in elementary school. I think I was like third grade, and I was like, I had it in me to like say I'm going to like learn how to play the saxophone, and I would even like on recess I would walk by the band room just to peek in and see people playing like those like band instruments, and it was like oddly enough just daydreaming about like just playing the saxophone one day, and I think I told a teacher of mine that I was interested in playing the saxophone. And because it's Seattle, like a teacher was like, "Oh, you should listen to Kenny G. Kenny G is from Seattle." I was like, "Okay, like, what's Kenny G?" And they're like, "He's jazz." So it's like that weird time where like it was like '96, I think, and swing music became very popular. So
Mhm.
I just got into swing music because they played saxophones, and so yeah, I became like, and then like the Mask was super popular. I just became like really obsessed with like like anything that had big band in it for a while. And then it's a long story, but then like I had an older brother who lived with my dad who lived somewhere else, moved back in with my mom, which who I was living with, and he was listening to punk rock. So that was the first time I was exposed to punk rock. And so he was listening to a lot of like skate punk back then. Like there was like of course like Green Day and like Bad Religion, but also like Dead Kennedys and stuff like
Mhm.
that. Also like ska music too. He was listening to the Specials too as well. So yeah, and so I but then also my stepdad, he was like a Hesher, right? He was like the and I think this is part of like what at the time this is part of like what I'm gonna go all over the place as far as like what I was into back then, but like
I'm here for it. Yeah.
he was he listened to thrash metal. He loved thrash metal. He loved Metallica. He loved Priest. He wore like when he was in high school, he wore like the spandex and everything. He hated grunge, and I think that was kind of like my part of my aversion to grunge music growing up in Seattle during grunge. Like I remember hearing like Pearl Jam on the radio, and like that was like what was happening, and I hated it. Like I didn't like it. To me it seemed too dark,
Hmm.
and what I really gravitated towards was like bright music, which is part of the reason why I liked big band stuff. But also like I loved 90s R&B. Like my
Hmm.
mom would listen to the station called Cube 93, and I think in the 90s it wasn't a strictly hip hop station, it was mostly a dance station, and then
Yeah.
it became a hip hop station towards like the end, like later in the night. But then like I would hear like, everything that was like great about 90s R&B through the radio, and then like, you know, I would see it like everywhere. Like you'd watch all that, and like it'd be like the people that like would come on the show and perform and stuff. So like rock music essentially didn't really come into my life until like probably middle school when Biscuit happened and
Hell yeah.
Corn.
There we go.
So
There we go.
so when yeah so and yeah, I think when so around that time I wanted to play saxophone, and when I got like old enough to play the saxophone in band, they told me I had to learn how to play a clarinet first for some reason. I don't know why.
Isn't it weird that like, cause I got to jump that because I play sax. I haven't played it like in a band in a while, but I played jazz band and I played in pit bands with it and all that kind of stuff. Played tenor and alto. I
Yeah.
actually have my alto back here, and I somehow scathed by that. But for whatever reason, in a lot of other schools, they would say that, and it was so weird because like I went to go play someone's clarinet and realized like the fingerings are different and
Right.
everything in between. Like why do you have to learn? It made no sense. But sorry,
Right.
go,
Just
go ahead.
because it's
Yeah,
a woodwind instrument, it's so
yeah,
weird.
yeah.
So I hated the clarinet. So I was like, I'm done. Like I can't do this instrument. Like I hated it. I hated every part of it. And so I had my stepdad had a crummy acoustic guitar that would like collected dust underneath his bed. And so I was like, I'll just play guitar in band. So then I started playing, Louie Louie in the school band, and then my dad taught me how to play like classic like Smoke on the Water riffs, and like taught me to play Iron Man, like
Hmm.
classic like riffs. Like when you learn how to play riffs, these are the riffs that you learn. I feel like every guitarist should learn the riffs that
Yes.
when you pick up a guitar. And then and then I got into like Ozzy, and then right around that time, that's when like the Ozfest started to happen. So I was like, what is Ozfest? And like, who are these bands playing? So of course, like new metal became a thing. And got really into Corn and Limp Bizkit. And my favorite band from that era though was Orgy. Do you remember Orgy?
I do remember Orgy. Yeah, yeah, it's a fantastic. That was a fantastic band, very formative. That, and along with Korn and Limp Bizkit, Linkin Park,
Right.
all that was very formative for me at a young age. So I'm right there with you. Yeah.
Yeah. In fact, my first concert was Family Values '99. That was
Oh,
my
no
first
kidding.
concert. Yeah. And
Incredible.
the lineup was crazy. It was like, if I'm remembering correctly, I think it was Stained that opened, and then it was Filter. I think Primus, yeah, Primus with Buckethead,
Man,
uh, and then Red Mad Method Man, and then Limp Bizkit headlined.
what a lineup! That
I
is
know,
like that is 2000s right there, or like late not.
right,
That would have been early 2000s at that point, right? Yeah, that
right,
is the early 2000s in a lineup right there.
right. And so, like, yeah, as a kid, I'm seeing like these bands, and like I remember someone booing Filter, and I was just like, "Why are you booing Filter? This is cool." Like, just being like 13 or whatever, I didn't understand like why anybody would boo the band. I was like, "All this is pretty cool."
Yeah.
And was funny. I didn't learn it was Redman Method Man until like a little bit later. I just assumed it was the Wu Tang because they had like
Yeah.
50 people on stage when they performed.
Hmm.
But yeah, so and then yeah, they debuted the "And Together Now" video with Method Man. They had like a
Yeah.
big screen, and we watched it "And Together Now" video. Yeah, that was
What a time. Yeah.
very very formative for me for sure. That era of music. But
Yeah.
yeah,
I mean, that's really interesting to hear you, because we'll obviously get into your music and where kind of like the songwriting aspect of things came from for
right,
you, but it's always interesting to hear from people that do the style that you're doing with your upcoming record. That it's not like you can't hear. There's definitely like we'll get into this later, but there's definitely like influences from aggressive music there, right? Kind of like what I was
right,
talking about earlier with what we were talking about with punk influenced bands or punk influenced artists and stuff. But it's always so funny to me when someone pulls out like that. Your music to me comes off as like very very well thought out, very like it's like a music. It's really really great musicianship. And then and I'm not saying this in a bad way of any of those bands, but a lot of musicians and a lot of people from our age group or a little younger and older like really shit talk on the new metal era as far as like musicianship goes, right? Like now new metal, I write for the new metal agenda a little bit here and there,
hmm
so I'm like really tapped in on these bands more than I used to be. But it's funny
right,
that it's come back now where like when I was, I'm maybe a couple of years younger than you, but when I was like graduating high school, it was like metalcore, post hardcore, emo, all that kind of stuff. And new metal was like considered like that's not even real music. Like if you're into heavy music, you don't like Limp Bizkit. Limp Bizkit's lame. You
right,
know what I mean? So it's just so funny how really that's not true at all, right? Because those
right.
bands have like made a new sound that had never existed before whatsoever.
I mean, and to be fair, like I think there was a lot of like valid criticism of the genre. I
Yes.
think
Yeah.
I think the stuff that I still can like listen to, like Limp Bizkit. I like Limp Bizkit because I don't take them seriously. I just think they're fun.
Yeah.
But
Right.
like, and I think they've become like self-aware with themselves that like they shouldn't take themselves too seriously. But
Right.
like there is like that aspect of new metal music where it's like incredibly like misogynistic and incredibly
Oh yeah.
homophobic.
Yeah.
But then again, like a lot of the stuff was that around that time anyway. Um,
Yeah. You
but
talk about
like
90s R&B or definitely early 2000s R&B and hip hop as well alongside new metal, and it's like
right,
yeah, you could just label it catchy misogyny in a lot of tracks.
right.
You know what I mean? Yeah.
But what's
Oh man.
funny is that like I think so when I started like our my first band, it was called ISS, and I don't want to say what that stands for because it's really stupid and embarrassing. But we had a singer who was like not a singer. He just had a look. He had like a
Mhm.
very classical like new metal look. He had like kind of like weird braided pieces on his head, and he wore goggles like
I
the
can
guy from
picture
Power
it.
Man 5000.
Yeah.
And then he quit. In typical like teenager, like he quit the band without ever us having a practice. Like he's like, I'm out of
Oh.
the band, and we didn't have. And then like a switch was flipped, and we were just like, hey, how about we try being a punk band? And so we just became a punk band, and that's when we started going to. The thing about Seattle, especially around that time, there was this thing called the Teen Dance Ordinance, which was I think it started in the '80s and till like the early aughts, where venues couldn't do all ages shows. So in order to go see shows live, you had to go to teen centers, and the mecca. Ask anybody my age, the mecca for great music around that time for someone our age was this place called the Old Firehouse in Redmond. And that's where I was exposed to bands like Botch, bands like the Blood Brothers, Pretty Girls Make Graves, Murder City Devils, every like great band from
Hmm.
that era of Seattle music played there. But not only that, like bands that like were inexperienced, like my band, could also play the same stage. And it was like one of those things where like like when you're new to punk rock, what's really like something that really gets like engraved into you is this idea of like, hey, you can do it too, right? Like, there's people on that stage, but you can be on that stage too because like this is for everybody. This is not no like I'm better than you type of thing. Like,
Right.
and It was also like a great place to hang out as a teenager with a bunch of kids like you. It was also the first time like I was exposed to like any sort of like queer representation. Like I saw like I remember seeing like the Gossip super early on. Saw a lot like Tracy and the Plastics. Saw
Hmm.
all this like which later like shaped like my queer identity as well. Um, and I don't think I would be anywhere who I am right now if it wasn't for the old Bauhaus, because I think also it shaped my politics too, because my parents and my brothers were like pretty like mostly my parents were pretty reactionary, and
Oh yeah.
especially like after 9/11.
Hmm.
um and in fact my like one of my brothers like enlisted in the Marines like right after 9/11. He became that guy,
Yeah, yeah.
and now is like as like reactionary and as
Hmm.
like shitty as you can get right now. But yeah, he enlisted because he thought it was the right thing to do. And yeah, and if it wasn't for this like subculture of like DIY punk, I would have probably like fell into that bullshit as well. But yeah, I
Yeah,
credit DIY culture a lot with for shaping my politics.
yeah, I'm right there with you. That's why, as you know from when we had conversations back and forth before doing this, like that's kind of what this show is about for me as well, is kind of diving into that with people, because that's how I'd be. Now, of course, like I don't know what your opinion is on this. I'm sure you have a similar opinion. Like I
Mm.
think music, politically charged music, or alternative scenes that might give space for, say, someone that's queer or part of the LGBTQIA plus community in any facet, that it gives you a space where, like you just said, maybe your family or your school or job, etc., your typical community, like there was no welcoming of that whatsoever, right? And like
Right,
that came from me as well. Like as far as politics, it was, Rage Against the Machine, all that kind of stuff, like got me to kind of check these ideas out that I had never heard before, growing up in like a conservative small town that had a lot of social issues that were like reminiscent of the 50s and 60s almost,
right,
and the
yeah,
90s and 2000s. But that, like, it's a great way to like open the door for people. But then
right,
you really got to end up diving more yourself, or finding things outside of solely like the music scene to really develop a better understanding of it. But
right.
is that fair for you, that was very much the case, where it was very
Oh
much
yeah,
like the gateway to open up, just like
oh yeah.
along with expression, like political ideology and all that kind of stuff?
Right. And it's funny with Rage, like, it took me a long time to realize that like where they stood politically, because growing up with Rage Against the Machine, like being very ubiquitous on the radio, you just like knew that they were like anti-authority, but you
Hmm.
didn't really like know like what it was that they were raging against per
Yeah.
se. And
A lot of people still don't, apparently, no matter how explicit they are.
right,
So.
right. But like they're like super into the Zapatistas. Like that's like in fact like their logo is a Zapatista logo. So like
Uh-huh.
when I found that I was like, oh, like they're like actually like very explicit about like what they believe in. Cause like
Hmm.
I feel like post like Rage, anybody that wanted to like be like vaguely political, they were just like the system, or
Yeah.
like it's we can talk about this later, but like I think there's been a commodification of like anti-capitalism,
Yes.
and but like that's existed for a long time, and before people were just like name dropping anti-capitalists, like if it was like McDonald's, um people were
Right.
saying people were saying like I'm against consumerism, like I don't like Christmas because it's too commercial, that type.
Yeah,
So
yeah.
like
Just vague, like you said, like vague self-aggrandizing bullshit that really
right.
isn't like from a place of principle or historical understanding
Right.
or
There's like
anything.
no
Yeah.
like dialectical materialism attached to it.
Yeah,
It's
yeah. I'm
just
just
like
edgy. I don't believe in the thing that other people like.
right.
I'm interesting. Yeah, yeah.
And it
There's a
can
lot
be
of that in
easily
the punk scene and all that.
yeah,
Yeah.
and it can be easily co-opted by the right too. We're just like, yeah, I
Oh
don't like
yeah.
the system, Me neither. Like we're against like the swamp, drain it, like that type of bullshit.
Corruption. Yeah. It's like, what do
Right.
you mean by that? Like, elaborate, right? Yeah. And then it's
Right.
usually bullshit. Yeah, yeah. 100%. I'm right there with you.
But yeah, like I think a lot of bands growing up that were very like overtly political were very like um I think for me, like that, like around 9/11, it was like a weird. There was a lot of dissonance for me personally because like I didn't at the time like I didn't really understand what was going on, and
Right.
there was a lot of like Rock Against Bush campaigns,
Hmm.
and at that time like there were some people that made me like not want to take it seriously. I think No Effects was one of those bands that made me like I don't know what it is about No Effects, but I can't seem to take them seriously when they get political. I don't know what it is. Like
It's probably all the dick jokes and the weird contrarianism they do elsewhere. Even when they have like
right,
solid, like Fat Mike has like some very has had historically some like very interesting opinions that he's put in the music about religion or politics or like Perfect Government was one of my favorite songs when I first found NoFX. And
right,
but at the same time, it's like, dude's such a jackass at the same time. It's so
right.
hard to like. Yeah, I totally
Yeah.
hear you.
It's like entryway to like, like typical like liberal like electoralism shit. So it's like
Yeah,
I you know what like if it's a starting point for many people, that's I think that's awesome. But for
right.
me like I just like it didn't really make sense.
Hmm.
And I think maybe that's why like I was like really into like the I think I was like more introspective around that time. So I wasn't really necessarily I didn't really get what I didn't really get what was happening around that time um until people started talking about gay rights, and I think that's when I started to like okay like there are these people that like would want me dead, like, and I don't know
Hmm.
why they would want me dead. Well, actually I knew why, because I was also like a self-hating Christian at the time as well. So, but I think queer politics definitely helped in bands like The Gossip, and then like bands like even just like the way like the Blood Brothers dressed,
Yeah.
like people always like were very homophobic towards that band because of how tight their jeans were. And I think that's just a really silly thing about that time where like people were just like, and if you wore skinny jeans, if you're a dude wearing skinny jeans, like you're gay. You're just gay, dude. Like,
Yep.
what are you doing?
Yeah.
And
I don't know. Like, yeah, it's interesting. I don't know when I'm kind of going off of uh I don't know what I'm trying to say here, but like it's interesting with stuff like that too. Just like how much like the most minimal things at that time, when you talk about the 2000s specifically, which is, like I said, when I was in high school and stuff, is how much aesthetic like mattered for people's perception of like your identity in a given way, right?
right,
Like at the time, like I was a kid that wore skinny jeans before they really made them like for men in the store a lot. So you'd
right,
buy girl
girl
jeans at the
jeans, yeah,
at Goodwill, right?
yeah,
and and it was just something you did, and it was like no big deal. And I certainly was just like a that typical heterosexual white dude. I just liked the
right,
way the look was, but at the same time, you'd have kids at school that would call you like the F slur and all this kind of stuff
right,
just because of how you dressed. And like at the same time, as much as you want to think things have changed, obviously we've seen in recent years things can regress very quickly as far as discourse and people's opinions and political stances and all that go. But
right.
it felt so out of whack of just like it was very draconian, you know what I mean, as far as people's
Right.
social views went. It was really really bizarre.
And what's so funny about those jeans that you would buy at Goodwill around that time was like those were like the Britney Spears like
Yeah.
era jeans, right? They were like low rise jeans. They were like you were like boot cut. So like I had a lot of my friends would wear like jeans that had like sparkles on them and shit,
Yeah, we would
because
always
that's
go.
just what you would find.
It was funny. Like I at first started doing that at the church camp that I worked at in high school, like this very
Mm,
conservative church camp. But we would go to Goodwill, and me and my friends there enjoyed emo music and the whole scene stuff. And
right,
so we would go there, and the goal you would go to Goodwill, and the goal was to try to find a pair of girl jeans that didn't have all the like,
right,
like designs in the seat. Like that was like if you found one and it fit, like it was a good
right,
day. You know what I mean? Yeah,
right.
but
Yeah,
that's
I
so
mean
funny.
that's like there should be like man, what a forgotten culture that was.
Yeah.
That's like crate digging, if you're like,
Uh-huh.
and it's like if you're like making beats, like, oh, I gotta find the perfect sample. Like back then, like, yeah, fighting jeans like that was like crate digging. You have to like find the perfect pair for sure.
So
Um,
funny.
Yeah, it's so funny. Yeah, so you also grew up like in like a church family as well, I take it.
Oh yeah, yeah. I could, not to
Okay.
talk about myself, but I could go about that for days. But yeah, yeah. Was initially going to go to school to be a pastor and the whole 9 yards, and went a
Yeah.
complete 180 with it. Yeah. So probably
Yeah.
very in line with you in a lot of ways on all
Yeah.
that kind of stuff. Yeah.
Yes, Seattle had such a weird thing. Like, there's an article online you can find. There was this church called the Mars Hill Church, and they had
Oh yeah, I
such
know
a
Marcel. Yeah, that
yeah.
I forget the speaker that was from there. He was sort of like a liberal pastor that I knew about. So at the time considered
Was
liberal.
was
I'm
his
sure if
name
I
Jeff? Was it
I'd
Jeff
have to look it
Bedecker?
up because he made like videos that my church would play sometimes. Like it was
Oh, you're talking
like,
about the main pastor.
yeah, yeah. I can't remember his name now, and it's
No, I
gonna
can't.
here.
No, yeah, he
I'm
sucks though. Yeah, he's
Yeah, yeah. He
terrible.
does suck. I remember my church was so conservative that he seemed like a liberal dude. That's how. Um, but was
Well,
it Mark Driscoll? Was that
yeah,
the
that's it.
guy?
That's it. What's
Yeah,
so
yeah, yeah.
wild about that was like, like because like I was part of like that like underground Seattle DIY scene. There was like a weird mesh. There was a melding because there was this place called the Paradox in Seattle, which was an all-age venue, and which is a place that I played at even, and it's a place that I've seen Blood Brothers play. Um, and they also was owned by Mars Hill, and one of the main bands there was this band called Suffering and Hideous Thieves, which had a pretty huge connection to Mars Hill. But Suffering and Hideous Thieves, it was an amazing band. Like to this day, like will still like listen to Suffering and His Thieves. And Jeff, the singer Jeff Bedecker or Jeff Suffering, was really huge on getting us, my old band back then, um, on shows with like bands that were like our age, like the Fall of Troy and stuff like that. And um, yeah, and then like there's like this weird thing because like there's like the Tooth and Nail mecca, right? Like because like
Hmm.
Jeff was in a band called Wrath of Dead Monkeys, and then 90 Pound was. So like there's like the Tooth and Nail bands, there was like the Solid State bands. So there was like this weird like cross pollination with like secular bands and like bands like Norma Jean would come through playing shows with like whatever like big hardcore band in Seattle was.
Or
And
like
so at the
Haste the
time,
Day or something like that as well with them. Yep, yep,
right, or Under Oath, or
yep.
like, and I think even Emery was from Seattle, even though they weren't
Yeah,
technically a hardcore band.
I think
Um,
they're. I think they might be. Yeah, I'm not gonna guess, but yeah, at least they were like in that whole crew of like the Tooth and Nail
right,
people and all that. Yeah, it was a weird time that there was so much in like the alternative sort of heavy music scenes. There is so much like Christian influence music. Like I think about like that sort of Christcore time
yeah,
all the time because it was the opposite pipeline for me. It was like I got into Christian heavy bands and then it led me to all these bands that like had these like quote unquote radical ideologies in their music. So it was actually like the pipeline for me to not be into
yeah.
Christian influence music. It was really funny.
Well, like being in Seattle, it was not cool to like Norma Jean because Botch. We had Botch. Well, even though Botch like broke up in 2001, if you liked Norma Jean, like we would call you a poser because like no, it's Botch, man. Like, what are you doing listening to Norma Jean? In fact, I think like they even like got Matt Bayless to like record one of their records. Even I remember they apparently like there was a record that they did with Matt Bayless where they were trying to get all of Botch's old equipment to use for the record.
Oh,
Yeah, so it went that far.
that's
Um,
yeah, that's major. I don't want to say ripoffs because that sounds I hate when people say that, but that's like yeah, that's like really biting at every
oh
level.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, but yeah, wow, yeah, it was such a weird time too. Yeah, because it's just like we had people. I was hanging out with people that were Christians, and we would we would go see Blood Brothers, and they would buy a shirt that says "This adultery is ripe," and they would get in trouble by their parents. And it's such a, oh my gosh, it's such a weird time. But yeah, like I think for the most part, anybody that was a part of that scene has clearly found their way out of it. Um,
Yeah.
and I think a lot of
Even
people
a
were
lot of the
faking it
bands,
too.
you know.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I think a lot of people
Um.
were faking it. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, I think I forget because I know Under Oath was like for the most part like legit with all that stuff, but there was and they wouldn't, of course, like a lot of people when a lot of these bigger name guys when they're on podcasts or get interviewed or whatever, they don't drop names, but I remember one of the Under Oath guys in an interview not that long ago, because now, they're more like outwardly secular, and a lot of the guys in the band are not, they don't even profess to be Christian, all that kind of stuff. Same for Devil
Mhm.
Wears Prada actually as well. But he was like, yeah, like half the bands you tour with on like a, tooth and nail solid state like centric tour bill, like they'd all be fake, like they'd profess all this stuff and then they'd go out and get hammered, or like, which is fine, I don't care, but like when you profess something and then you're like not doing anything other than like that after your 45 minute set, it's like, yeah, this really is just like a marketing thing, that's all it is,
Right. Yeah. Yeah, and I think a lot of people that I knew around that time like lost their faith because of the people that they were around like weren't like really they were faking the funk, as they would say, like
Yeah,
they
they were
weren't
into it. They were into it when it came to the bigotry and when it came to the,
right.
putting certain people in their place and living by a certain like rigid framework, but not when it came to like the stuff that was good, that you could get,
Right.
that could be positive in your life from it, right?
Yeah.
Like it was just all the most draconian, like reactionary bullshit.
Yeah, and I think
Um,
honestly, having like Bush as a president had like a lot to do with that. Honestly, like it was like these like rigid, like super conservative and like reactionary ideas like packaged in like punk rock or
yeah,
whatever, or crabcore or whatever you want to call it.
yeah,
Um, and I think like it's kind of I think that kind of seeped its way, and because like oh, man, I was listening to like the David Cross comedy album that came out around that time, and I remember listening to that record during Obama and just like recoiling at like just their memory of like living through the George Bush years.
yeah,
And and then I'm listening to it now. I'm like, oh, like it's way worse now. Like, well, it's way worse in a lot of ways. I mean,
yeah.
um, but it's like, yeah, I mean, like, yeah, it's, yeah, it was such a shitty time. But like, I mean, I could say a lot about like where we are now versus where we were back then. But I used to remember just listening to that record and being like we're better now, but like now it just seems quaint to like having to like talk about Strom Thurmond and like all these like dead and gone people. Um,
Yeah, when we've got ones that are currently running the show that are absolute monsters, that are apparently the less bad of the absolutely worst monsters, according to a lot of people. It's like, shit's
God,
bleak, man.
yeah.
You
I
know?
mean, no, we're yeah. It's the empire is dying for sure. That's for sure.
Yeah.
That's
I think
I think
I
it's
think that
undeniable at this point.
yeah, it's a big part of it is, things have gotten so out of whack that you bring up, you use the term reactionary in a very accurate sense of like, people can go two ways a lot of the times with this. They can sort of get, like you were talking about, like conscious with dialectic materialism, or caring about material conditions and caring about like policy and caring about all these different things, or you can just find scapegoats, right? And like that's
Right.
where, and like when things are kicked to 11 with everything from wage inequality to, a pandemic to war to all these different things that really are destabilizing, let alone like a police state and everything in between. Like
Right.
people can typically, if they either do either one of those two things, or they check out and pretend everything's fine until everything blows up, right? So
Right.
it's not surprising, but it is sobering every day when you think about it.
Right. And and to go back to like making like political records, because
Mhm.
my record Tabitha is a very political record, but it's I was I had like ideas of like how like I wanted to portray like my politics, and like I was trying to like make different like I don't know, like I was trying to like think of like how I would approach to making a political record, and I got really into well, I mean, I've always been into these bands, but like I was really like putting them on heavy rotation. Bands like Stereolab and like bands
Mhm.
like Nation Ulysses, or even like bands like The Makeup, or you know a lot of the Ian Savonius works. And I was thinking about like how they approach politics in their music, and you can talk about like how Rage does their politics, and I think Rage does a very effective like how they communicate their politics through their records. It's very direct, um, and a lot of times you'd have to look up what they were talking about. And I think System of a Down does the same thing, right?
Hmm.
Very direct, but I like the subversion of a Stereolab. I like the subversion of the makeup. I like this like kind of like playing with language and like not necessarily spelling things out for you.
Hmm.
And I equate that with like how I just talk to normal people about politics. Because like working in a grocery store, I mean, when I was living in Seattle, like the grocery store I was working at was a union job. Like we were part of
Hmm.
a union. And then I moved to Los Angeles, and it's not very easy getting a union job here in grocery. And the job that I transferred to was not a union job. And when I first started working at that store, I thought that I would be a salt. I was asking people around about like, what is it about their job that they like? What is it, about their job that they don't like? And in I use the same approach to like just talking to anybody about politics, where like I don't, necessarily like to come across as like this Marxist Leninist to people, even though I am that. But
Right.
like, I don't want to like give up the game, to somebody that I
Yeah.
just met. So like I typically will ask people about like, what is it about their life that, that they don't like? And if they could change it, how would they change it? And what would life be like if those things that they didn't like were changed? And how would their life be improved? And once you figure stuff like that out, then you can talk to people about like, okay, well, maybe have you tried doing this? Like, have you talked about, maybe you just started a union with like the people at work? Are you familiar with that process? Um, just like having like normal conversations with people, I think is very effective when it comes to, trying to like give people like the tools they need to like, you know, I think of like, joining a union as something that benefits everybody that
Right.
is a worker. I don't necessarily think a union is inherently political necessarily. It is, but like, there's also like, reactionaries that like are in unions as well. But
Hmm.
ultimately, you want like workers to have a better life. You want workers to live with dignity. You want workers to have some autonomy, a seat at the table. You want like people to like people to live like with dignity and having like having a living wage. You want it just goes back to like dialectical materialism, right?
Right. Yeah. No, I mean, I think what you're saying there is that is, if you're someone that knows their shit like you clearly do, that is the Marxist way of handling things, is meeting people where they're at, right? Because like
Right,
the people that are overly online, people that read all that stuff and just like to like, they probably don't even talk to anybody about it in person. They just like finger wag on Twitter or Instagram or whatever. Um, that's not what that's not how any of this would ever work. Like, it's one of those
right,
things. It's like what I talk to people now, and then we'll finally get into the record. Sorry, but it's like when I talk to people about electoral politics now, or you'll see the discourse on electoral politics, and it's like the mainstay like Democratic liberals that will finger wag and right now just trying to shame people into voting Democrat in the presidential election. To me, like anyone that's doing stuff like that, and like we all like to yell at people on the internet sometimes, I guess, for catharsis, but to do that and think people are going to change their mind when you're like, this is, or be open to a new idea by going, you're wrong, you fucking suck, here's what you
right,
should believe in, that has worked for nobody ever. Like,
right,
even if you believe in something and someone else, like it's never been how this works. And it's actually how, like, not even how most like socialist Marxist, like, public figures or academics or whatever would ever tell anybody how to handle that, right? So actually what you're doing
right.
is the correct way to handle your own ideology,
Yeah, and
right?
it's
So
also very dismissive. Like the whole like Google is free like mentality is ridiculous. Like you're not
yeah.
going to. It doesn't benefit anybody telling somebody that to Google it, right?
Yeah.
You can't you can't expect people to meet you where you are at. Like you have to be Google. Sometimes in conversations,
Hmm.
it's just yeah.
Yeah, right. It's I don't know. That's why people's brains are so broken now. It's because people just can't have a goddamn conversation. But that's just again, like you said, the dying empire that we live in, right? Um,
Right.
to segue from that, you brought it up a little bit here, so it is like in the right on par with the conversation. Like we said, your upcoming record coming out August 9th,
Yeah.
um, titled Tabitha.
Mhm.
Like you said, you had talked to me before. Obviously, like politics do influenced your music. I did want to get into the music and the lyrical inspirations here, because what I found interesting, obviously, first and foremost, when I pulled up the record, and as I told you, I think this record's absolutely fantastic.
Appreciate it.
I think anyone that checks it out will find at least a few things that they love, if not the entire record, right? Regardless of what they typically listen to. But um, the first thing I noticed when I pulled it up was every single track of the 9 tracks on here is a different name, right? Is a
Yes.
different, and so I'm guessing there's, if it's not a hard concept record, there's obviously some there's some thought out process here with all of this that kind of loops it all together. So why don't we dive into this right now? And
Okay.
first, tell me, let's go lyrics first, and then maybe the songwriting process for you.
For
Um,
sure.
what's the idea behind this record overall, and what's the concept behind each track having its own individual like person's name?
Yeah, Tabitha is it's very conceptually dense. Um,
I thought so, but
and
I'm often wrong. So
yeah, so you say 9 tracks. I think you're looking at the SoundCloud, right?
yeah.
So SoundCloud copy struck in one of my songs recently.
Oh,
Like
okay.
one of my own songs was because the label's distribution company was like, this song belongs to Sasha Bolof, so we're gonna so they took it down. So it's actually 10 songs. So
Okay.
I'm in the process of like trying to convince this fucking company that it's me
I
to
love
give
when
me
that
back my right.
happens.
It's
You know
so
how many times
stupid.
I've gotten copywritten with my own music as well? It's like, but it's me. I'm the copyright guy. I don't
Right.
understand. Yeah.
Like part of me like wants to be like a boomer and like call them up on the phone and just yell at them and be like, give me, that's my song, like it's me. But yeah, yeah, there is a concept naming all the songs after specifically women
Hmm.
came about oddly enough from a Goldfrapp record. And I'm trying to remember the name of the record. It's a lovely record. I can't remember. I think it's called The Tale of Us. Um, but I love it. It's in every song on that record is the person's name. And I didn't realize that also Cocteau Twins did the same thing. Like Lorelei, apparently, like they're all like fancy names. But yeah, I all the records that I've made were very autobiographical. They're very like introspective about like my life, and I wanted to try to write in a more narrative way.
Hmm.
And I came up with this concept of like 9 women and their stories and how politics affect their lives. And some of the women that I sing about are real and some of them aren't. Some of them are kind of a play on words, like
Hmm.
April um is a month and a name. There's also this theme of spring that goes throughout the entire record. It's a very spring plays a big part of the theme of the record, and spring can mean a bunch of different things. It could be the season. It could be a lot of different things.
Hmm.
New beginnings.
Right.
If you
Rebirth,
want
all that kind of stuff. Yeah.
rebirth,
Hmm.
whether it be physically, intellectually,
Hmm.
um, I'm gonna try to. I want to try to be as like vague as possible with like what,
Yeah.
because I ultimately like I know what the songs are about, but
Hmm.
I like it when people can come up with like different like meanings.
Hmm.
Like Jane, which is like the first single that just came out. There's a really specific meaning behind that song, and what Jane is kind of about my relationship to my friend Beth. Beth and I are both trans women, and we have like a really deep and rich friendship. And it's kind of like this story inspired by like a song by the Zombies called Courtesy of Cell 44, where it's one person talking to another person who's incarcerated. And in the song Jane is the person that's incarcerated, even though my friend isn't named Jane. But in the story, the person singing the song is talking to her friend Jane, and Jane is trans, and Jane is in prison. Um, it's implied that like she's wrongfully imprisoned,
Hmm.
um, and she goes through hellish conditions. Like it's implied that like she goes through a lot of like incarceral violence, and which is a very real thing. Like
Right.
it's a very real and scary thing. And so one of the scariest things about being trans is being incarcerated and being put uh, in a compound where like you're like your identity doesn't match where you are, whether
Right.
it be a trans woman in specifically a trans woman in uh, a male prison.
Hmm.
And it's a real thing, it's a real fear, and it's really fucked up. And that's what that song's about. But I've had people that I've listened to I gave like early access to had different meanings to that song. Like I've had a friend who was like, "Oh, this kind of like sounds like it's songs about like substance abuse," which it could be as well. There's a
Right.
line in the song where it says, "Curse the state that caused this pain," and
Hmm.
that could be any sort of like state violence, whether it be carceral, whether it be you know,
Yeah. It could be like, yeah, it could be hurt and violence in a way from what's the word I'm looking for? Like despair because the system in place. It could be police violence. It could, yeah. There's
right,
so many things that can be connected to. Yeah, that just shows that you're a really good songwriter, that you can think of it that well. That it can mean those many things despite you. That's what I look. That's like always to me a mark of a good songwriter is, I think, it can be tough because people a lot of times will want to make a song vague in the sense of like wanting it to be universally connecting to the point that it almost feels sterilized, or
right,
the lyrics are somewhat cliche or whatever. Or people, and this is something I do too often in my own music, is I go, you can go so specific that it's like, unless you're tapped into what the topic is, it's like, what the hell is this even about, right? But there's
right,
there's that line, people can walk with meaningful lyrics, where you can do both, right? You can have a meaningful song that connects everybody, like you said, with whether it's the story you intend or whatever anybody else may, and yet there's still a specificity to it that feels like it has its own character, right? So that's, I don't know, that's
yeah.
just a mark of a good song. You know what I
Oh,
mean?
thank you. Appreciate that.
Mm-hmm.
Hey, can you hold on one second? My laptop is not plugged in. I'm getting the
Yeah.
low battery signal. So let me try
Yeah.
to plug it in
Yep.
real quick.
Yep. No worries.
All right. One's in the chat if you can hear me. One's in the chat. Can I get a pog champ? Okay.
All right. So yeah, so I mean, that song one, I thought that was the one. I'm really bad with song titles. This is why I take notes. But that was the
Oh,
one
yeah.
that you recently put the video out for, right? That's
Yes.
that's I the video is fantastic as
Thank
well.
you.
Um I'm not going to make you go through every single one of these with like lyrical connotations. Like you said, you don't
You
want to
can
give the
if you
game
want.
away.
Yeah, it's
We
up to you.
certainly can. All right. Well, let's start here for the next one. Like, go down the line here with the title track at the very least, Tabitha. I know, like you said, you
Yes.
don't want to give the game away, but what's kind of the lyrical concept or inspiration there?
So Tabitha is the kind of omniscient narrator that narrates the entire record.
Hmm.
She's played by Andrea Zolo, uh, front woman of the band Pretty Girls Make Graves.
Is that the
And
person doing the sort of like the voiceover stuff? Very cool. Very cool.
yeah, yeah. Someone in high school, I was huge. Oh, I was a huge fan of Andrea, and was lucky enough to play the show with one of her bands. And like, I wanted to say we're friends. I'm just gonna say we're friends. We're friends.
Yeah.
We're friends.
Well,
So
when
yeah,
someone's on your record, I think, and doing, this being this, I think you could. I think that counts. Yeah,
yeah,
that
yeah,
we're
yeah.
going with it. Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, and oh my god, like her voice, like she perfectly encapsulates this concept of Tabitha to me. Tabitha is like, I had this idea of like what Tabitha meant. Like Tabitha is the spring. Tabitha is the flowers. Like Tabitha is like this like ethereal being that represents springtime, and she kind of oversees essentially like I guess like every character in the story of that is the record. I guess you can probably see it that way.
Yeah.
Um, so Tabitha is so I had bottom surgery like 2 years ago, and that's when I started writing the record,
Mhm.
and So Tabitha was one of the first songs I wrote while recovering from surgery, and it's a probably the most one of the I think one of the most like personal songs on the record,
Hmm.
in the sense that like it's about just like what that process was like. Um, the lyrics are kind of like, wow, it's really hard to explain. I never really thought about the lyrics of the record, or at least of the song. It's almost like this, like, coming to terms with like, your trans identity, and like also becoming more comfortable with your body. Also like this concept of like, you've always known this to be true, and then now it's like you finally realized. It's like it's kind of spiritual in a way, and it's
Yeah,
like,
absolutely.
um there is like this like kind of like call in like to I don't know, I don't want to say darkness, but like there's like this like almost this like conversation to something that isn't necessarily a materialized form, calling whether it be like your subconscious or to a higher being or whatever. This like question, who are you, right? And it's like
Right.
it's repeats throughout the song, and there's like lines like, every time I croon, who are you? But then like every time I sang, it's all you know. It's like this like kind of like saying like, at one point of your life you were doing things this way, and it's like you're not being who you are. Like, who is this person that's doing this? But then when you started doing things like this, it's like, okay, this is you. This is who you are. And I use the word croon because I think it's associated with like a very low singing timbre. So like,
Hmm.
yeah. And that's also kind of part of like what this record was also about, was like me trying to sing in a way that was like more, that represented the way that I speak than some of my older records. Like in my older records, like I wasn't like singing in a way that, I mean, I was singing in a way that I was always singing in a way on records, but like when I would play like my older records to people like that I would work with, and they're like, who is this person singing? I'm just like, oh, it's me. And they're always like, are you using an effect? I'm like, no,
No, it's
I'm
just
not
me.
using
Yeah,
I'm
yeah.
not using an effect. In fact, that happened in the studio. There's a couple songs where I am singing like a low harmony, and I
Hmm.
remember recording in the studio, and um, I would sing the low parts, and I'm like in like a little isolated booth, so no one can see me. And I come back out, and like the engineer was like, "Are you using an effect on your voice?" And I'm like, "What effect? Like, I'm
Yeah,
in a vocal
you're
booth,
you're in the box, man. Like you
right?"
like to the engineer, it's like yeah, what? Yeah, exactly. Like an analog effect. You're bringing like a vocoder secretly in
Right.
the.
Yeah, and I think that record, that song, and Savannah are both songs that are explicitly about trans identity and like my relationship to trans identity and like different aspects. I think Tabitha is more like about like a rebirth, like a song about rebirth, and yeah.
No, it makes a lot of sense, and I mean, I think, like you said, it's this record's more narrative. This is obviously one that you said is the most personal oriented, if that vocabulary is correct there.
Yeah.
But yet it still kind of fits in the overall theme, and you can still have it fit this narrative. So again, not to like not to beat a dead horse here, but it just goes back to good songwriting on that front once
I
again of
appreciate
like
that.
that thoughtfulness with the lyrical delivery and everything.
Thank you.
So you said you mentioned Savannah's somewhat similarly on
Yeah.
a at least like for the inspiration for that one.
Yeah, Savannah's like was kind of a tough song for me because Savannah is about like motherhood. And yeah, it's about like my relationship to motherhood, and like my relationship to my mom, and like my relationship to whether I can be a good mom if I had a mom that wasn't so great,
Hmm.
and the anxiety that comes with that. And also like, after a surgery, like I had this like impulse to want to have a child. Like I remember recovering in bed and was like, wow, like I really wish that I could was able to give birth. Like this is something that I really wish I could do. So it kind of comes from that. It also comes from just if having a child is something that would be the missing piece, right? If that's something that
Right.
like if I really wanted, like if being a mom was something that would make me feel whole? And that's a question I still don't really have an answer to. Like, um, I think eventually, like, I would love to be a mom. In fact, like, I'm kind of a mom right now to a cat. So I mean, I'm getting a little practice when it comes to motherhood. But yeah, it's just, and like, the song Savannah, it's named after. So when I wrote the song, I knew what the song was going to be about. So I was like, what's it going to be called? Like, what is a name that like I can use? Like, I thought about using like Gaia or something like corny like that, like something like, or Eve or something like very
Mhm.
like corny to symbolize motherhood. And then I thought about what you know years ago, like in my 20s, like I was thinking about names of for children if I had children, and one of the names was Savannah. So it's called, I named it Savannah, and towards the end of the record or end of the song, I am essentially kind of like singing to a might be future Savannah, like as like I'm singing into the future to her, whether it will happen or not. But that's essentially how the song ends.
I love that. I love the of course like the entire topic, but I love that like you. I was wondering if you're gonna get to that if the name was gonna be like for a theoretical child, and that makes a lot
Yeah.
of sense for the song, and also it's a I think that's a philosophical or I don't know the correct word, self discussion. I think everyone has with themselves is like whether or not this is this is something you truly want or like sort of that instinct and everything in between. That's really cool. I think
Yeah.
again specific to yourself and yet can be a universally connected lyrical concept. Really cool. We can go down the line here. I'm all for it as
Yeah.
long as you enjoy
Yeah.
talking about these things.
Hey, yeah,
Next
go for
one,
it.
next one on the album would be Rosa. Can you tell me a little bit about what the lyrical inspiration is for that one?
Yeah, Rosa is named after Rosa Luxemburg. So, um, it's funny. Like, it's a very this record is very political, and I tried to hide like my very specific political leanings.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, it might be hidden to some. It might be incredibly obvious to others when they listen to it, especially when Andrea literally quotes Lenin at the end of the record. Um,
Love
but
it.
yeah, it's Rosa is about liberalism. It's about specifically radical liberals and the people that have been in my life who are probably the most annoying. Um, they're I wrote the song after I had a falling out with a friend. We shared a practice space in Los Angeles. She basically she was renting out the space, and so she told me to move out of the practice space. I was like, fine, like gladly, I'll be glad to move out of the space. And so I'm there picking up my gear, and I was like, you know what, I'm gonna get like a song out of this real quick. So I wrote the riff that like kind of like almost like it almost has like an Eastern European feel, like the really like I don't know, just that like open chord riffs.
Mm-hmm.
um, but yeah, I wrote that riff in that space, very angry. And I remember there was a cardboard sign on the practice wall that says "Death to all men." And I remember like how reductive that is. Like that's so silly. Yeah, death to all men. Like yeah, what about like the black men that get murdered by the fucking police? Are you saying they deserve it because they're fucking men? So it's so typically like fucking rad lib. It pissed me off
Yeah,
so much. I was just like,
yeah. So entrenched in just like there, some, in a bad way, like
yeah,
it's just some like baser contrarian like identity politics, to the
right.
point of it's seeming like being like like an insurgent, like like a vehement. I can't remember. Man, I'm doing horrible with vocabulary today. But like, it comes off as this sort of like I mean, rad lib, I guess, but like legitimately radical position, but it's actually just complete nonsense.
Yeah, it's
Yeah.
so stupid. It's so like, it's like the zealotry of the newly converted, right? It's like
Hmm.
this whole like concept of like, oh, like now that like, I've read like certain like feminist works, like this is how I feel. And it's just it's so yeah, it just boils my blood when like I don't know why it pisses me off so much when I see shit like that. So so the song is about that concept. And I wrote that song like probably like a year and a half ago, the lyrics. And the lyrics are very simply like, I was chilled by the words you chose to frame as they hung next to you. And I was actually just thinking about like shitty takes and
Yeah.
not only framing the way their take in a certain way, but also with the fact that they would hang it up and frame it and just
Yeah.
sit there next to their framed take and like be like, yeah, this is what I believe, and then being horrified by that take. And what's funny is that like I kind of like another good example of something like that is fairly recent when um like after like October 7th, when I've seen like a lot of like liberal Zionists saying like the most putrid shit. And I was just like horrified by a lot of these people that I don't know how far I wouldn't say respect, but like people that like I'd hold to at least a higher standard were saying like
Hmm.
genocidal Islamophobic nonsense. And I was just like so like dumbfounded by like I was like, do you like yeah, it's I think neoliberalism I think liberalism just rots your brain. And
Yeah. Yeah.
and and I think it definitely rot a lot of people's brains. I think a lot of them came back. I think a lot of them have like kind of like backtrack a little bit since then. But I just remember at that time I was just like I was just so mad at these people, and I'm just yeah. So that's basically what Rose is about, and you know me wishing I was more like Rosa Luxemburg, and yeah, I mean it's that's basically all the song is about.
Yeah. I mean,
It's an angry
that's
song.
a yeah. I mean, those are my favorite personally, so that's why I'm all about it. But that concept you bring up there, I think is it's hard, I think, to articulate to people, or it was in some ways hard to articulate that kind of concept to people before the last several months, in the sense of like,
Right,
I don't know, like you're bringing up kind of like the radical liberal ideology, if there is one. It's more vibes and contrarianism, but
right,
but uh but like I hated the worst thing that, and it still gets brought up all the time, is that like, oh well, Palestinians and Arab people like are homophobic or hate the LGBTQIA plus community and all this kind of stuff. And it's like, yeah, you're really saving the queer Palestinians that are getting bombed, you fucking
right,
idiot. You know what I mean?
right,
It's like there is no take that takes away the bombing of civilian, like how do you not, it's like let alone what you could get into about the LGBT community within Israel, right? There's a whole thing you could get into, but like, set
right,
all that aside. It's like, to just like stop. Just say you don't view these people as human beings, because
right.
you can cover it up in all the pseudo progressive language. Or my favorite was when conservatives would bring that up, like they don't fucking hear, like try to kill people in that community. You know what I mean?
Right. So
But
cynical.
yeah, it's just cynically
Yeah.
deployed to at the end of the day, make yourself feel like you're on the right side of history, as you're like backing like the most horrific thing we've seen in our lives, right? And like,
Yeah.
that was a
It,
big wake up call for me personally, because like I think on like October 8th, I said something about putting this all in context, and and still free Palestine and all these kinds of things, as people are like losing their minds, and you see everything from the NBA to like people you thought were you know active anti-war activists and all this kind of stuff, saying these things. And like, I mean, yeah, same deal. Like a lot of my friends, I had a good friend try to dox me to my job as a result
oh
of
my
it,
God.
right? Like, and
Yeah.
and that's not like woe is me, like I don't give a shit, but it's more of like, it's the reality of like, you guys have no principles, you live life
Right.
off of vibes, you know what I mean? Like, and you
Right.
have no understanding of the real world. That's just the bottom line. And so, yeah, I bet that was, I could see you sitting down and seeing that like in a different context, in your practice space, just
Well,
being
yeah,
like, God, these people fucking suck.
because it's like their mode of operation. Like liberals like believe that there's a good guy and a bad guy, right?
Yeah.
So like if you're a good guy, you believe what I believe. If you're a bad guy, you don't. Like it's the same mentality of like things happening to people in the South and liberals rejoicing because they live in the South and they voted for Trump or whoever, right? And like not really realizing that like no, these are people. You're like this idea of like because like you are homophobic means that you deserve death, you know And that's a really gross mentality to me. Like it's such a I don't know, it's so fucking evil. Like I it's I find it hard to really articulate exactly
Yeah,
like
it's
what
hard
makes
to
me so
articulate
mad about
because
these people.
like you said, I think the bottom line is a lot of people try to view things as good guy versus bad guy when it's like, and not between Palestine and Israel, but in general, especially in war, it's mostly a lot of r- rich, terrible people on all sides that are putting everyday people in the crosshairs and having them, there's like the quote from a Linkin Park song where it's like when the rich wage war, it's the poor who die. Like that's like the real belief you should have on this stuff. Or like you said about like, say Texas. I remember when like the Texas grid froze over and people were
Right.
dying, and I saw popular like pundits and commentators and stuff like, or just like popular accounts on social media being like, well, that's what you get for voting in a conservative. It's like, what the fuck? Like, this is, shut the fuck up. You know what I mean? Like, people
Right.
died. Shut up. Like,
Yeah,
I don't
it's
know.
like it's what happens when like politics is just a team sport to them,
And
you
it's,
know?
yeah. And
And
it's
it's
for the
like
sake of consumption. And it's
right.
awful. Yeah, no, 100% agreed. And great topic to write about, to go back to the album a
Yeah.
little bit, Um, to go from there, what about Michelle? What about that song?
Michelle is I mean, it's simply put, it's a queer love story between two girls, Michelle and Mary, who live in Los Angeles and are very conscious of the environment or environmental activists who meet, fall in love, find out they have politics in common. They found out that they have a sign in common, and it's just about like the balance of like your personal politics and also like just trying to live like a life that is worthwhile, and trying
Mm-hmm.
to be present, I think, I've been on a lot of dates in Los Angeles where I try to like toe the line between like, should we talk about like politics and how much should we talk about politics? Can we just like enjoy this fucking donut or whatever that we're
Yeah.
doing? Like, I'm a big fan of the podcast True and On, and I
Mhm.
always
That's a
like
great
have,
one. Love that
yeah,
podcast. Yeah, yeah.
and I always have like the term like be normal. Like I just have like that phrase be normal repeated in my head because like like I've had dates where like we talk about is politics and then there's no more spark. I don't know, like we just get so cerebral that we just kind of like lose like what we were there
The
initially.
moment, right? Yeah,
Right.
yeah. No,
And
that makes a lot of sense. Yeah.
yeah. And I think Michelle was called Michelle because I initially was going to do like a remix of this song by this band called Michelle. There's this song called Pose. I guess they're more of a pop band. I don't know. But they're kind of like R&B kind of pop. Like they had this really like catchy song called Pose that I was really obsessed with. So I took like the BPM of that song and I was going to sample it and then I was going to like incorporate it into the song and I just named the session Michelle after the band and then just decided that I wasn't going to use any part of the song, though it's the same BPM, but the name stuck. And I used Mary even though there isn't that's the subtext. That's the subtext for one of the characters' names, even though it's not written in any of the lyrics, as a tribute to Mary Henson from Stereolab. Yeah, I'm a huge cyclist. I'm very, very. I love riding my bike. When I moved to Los
Mhm.
Angeles, I was afraid of how little I would be able to ride my bike, and it turns out I actually ride my bike a lot more.
Oh, nice.
And there's a really good bike culture in Los Angeles. And got more like how I got more acquainted to the city, I explored by riding my bike to places, whether it be commuting to work or just like exploring as far as I can go. And it's kind of like the backdrop to the song where it is about the city that I live in, where it seems like a giant parking lot, but like there is a lot of beauty in Los Angeles, and riding your bike and getting to know the city that way is very magical. And yeah, it's and Mary was also Sarah was also a very uh, um, big cyclist, and I think I have that in common with her, as well as like cycling is, can be an act of protest against a very car centric city. And also, yeah, and she unfortunately lost her life by being struck by a car. So that was kind of like a subtle, almost subconscious like tribute to her and other people that choose to ride their bike and commute.
I love it. I love amidst, these political songs and literally like the previous one we talked about being filled with rage that you've got, like uplifting messages within the song, because that's good to do, because when you're
Yeah,
tapped into politics as you clearly are, and I struggle with this myself a lot. It can be tough to like make sure to kind of stop and, like you said, be present and enjoy things, let alone like
right.
be able to make a song like that conveys that. So absolutely awesome. That's really cool. Next with Jessica, what's the lyrical inspiration, songwriting inspirations, all the good stuff for that one?
So Jessica is named after a friend of mine who 2 years ago died of cancer, and it was roughly around the same time I was recovering from surgery, and I wanted to write a song about her that wasn't too sad. I wanted to like be like a celebration of life. I've written songs about people who've passed that were very sad, and I wanted to try to write something that was like a little bit more upbeat, a little bit more, inspirational. I just wanted to write a song that like was wistful, but like not depressing. And when I moved to Los Angeles, another friend, I lost another friend to cancer as well. So I wrote the music to it in Seattle before I moved, and then I finished a record or finished the lyrics after my second friend passed. So it's kind of a tribute to both Aaron and Jessica.
Very, and it's always, again, not to keep putting in my little spiels on these as we go through, but it is great that you're able to, you know, like you said, not, make a song in this way that's like a true, what people claim they do at funerals and various things, but it's never really this way, like an actual celebration of life. Like
Mm,
they'll put that on flyers a lot and stuff, and yet it's still, especially in the United States and Western society, it's just like so dreary and like half the time
yeah,
filled with like, telling other people to go to church or something, and instead
right.
where this is like a true like celebration of some friends. That's
Yeah.
awesome. Next, also, did I which track? Just so I know for the track listing for myself, which track was actually taken down from the in the track listing for the record?
June
Okay,
is it's going to be the second single, so that's the one that got taken down, unfortunately.
okay. Before I move on here, just because I'm looking at things and I have the brain capacity of a newt. What's the inspiration behind that one?
June is was written around the George Floyd uprisings, and it was a big part of what was happening in Seattle. I was part of a mutual aid called Seattle Bike Brigade because there was a lot of marches, a lot of demonstrations. Cops weren't allowed, and so the organizers would get in contact with Seattle Bike Brigade, and we would cork roads with our bikes. We would block. We would be like the line between protesters and traffic. So yeah, we did that all throughout that summer. And unfortunately, somebody at a protest did get murdered by a fucking car, which was really it was incredibly sad. It was a very late protest, so it wasn't like a very high attended
Mm-hmm.
protest, but nonetheless, the person lost their lives due to an asshole behind a car. And so it's kind of like I think it's the first song I wrote for the record, and it was also like inspired by the Portishead song, um, "The Rip,"
Mm-hmm.
because like I love the arpeggiating guitars that turn into like arpeggiating synths and just gets bigger and bigger. My cat just woke up. Yeah, it's so the lyrics came a little bit later, because I got like a lot of people when like Joe Biden became the Democratic nominee, and then when he announced that Kamala Harris would be his running mate, a lot of people in my activist circles saw that as a big fuck you to the movement.
Yep.
And we were really, we were really bitter at that response, where we thought we were doing something incredibly historic, and that administration's response was like, you know what, we're going to hire a cop to be our vice president. And yeah, it sucked. And I remember walking up to work on Capitol Hill in Seattle, and when they announced after the election, and they announced that Joe Biden officially won, I heard people in like the apartment buildings cheering. I think a lot of people were very celebrated, and I just remember just feeling like this like overwhelming feeling of despair, and thinking that like, wow, like things aren't going to get better for a long time. And I just remember like I remember wanting to be a little bit happy that Trump was out of office, but I was just like, I don't think
Yep.
anything great is going to happen like for a long
Mm-hmm.
time. So the lyrics of that song was going to be a very like naive, like I was trying to be like naive about like how I was feeling during the height of the George Floyd uprisings. And then like I don't know, like I think later on I was just like, you know, I really want to be a little bit more positive towards like direct action. And I really, because I still believe in direct action, I still believe in protests. Even now, like I think protesting right now is incredibly beneficial. I think a lot of people, I mean, recently a lot of people were really upset about the whole AI generated image for Gaza. And
Yeah.
for good reason, I understand why people were really upset. But I think ultimately, the Israeli project spent like decades dehumanizing the Palestinian people in such a way that like an entire generation of people don't see Palestinians as human beings. So
Mm-hmm.
any effort to humanize the Palestinian people is ultimately a good thing, even if it's done cynically in a way to like, you know, say, hey, like I care about this thing. Ultimately, that just it's still beneficial, like at the end of the day, because any sort of like momentum to humanize the Palestinian people is a step in the right direction for sure.
Yeah, absolutely. And yeah, I when I first saw that, I luckily like I had listened to I listened to a podcast called The Insurgents an awful lot. Actually, both of the guys on that have been on the show before, and and they said something that kind of pulled me out of my cynicism. They're like, well, it got shared by like tens and tens of millions of people, that AI image you're talking about, and it's crazy because like, you know, some of us, like, our initial reaction might have been like, well, why aren't you sharing the pictures of the actual devastation and the and but they were like, if this was you should view this as a opening door for people that you see doing that for the first time, not again, once it goes back to what I said before, like if you feel yourself like legitimately finger wagging at somebody that's like starting to maybe get it, or like opening their eyes slightly, it's like
Right.
that's closing the door and not opening it, right? So like,
Yeah.
no, absolutely, I think that's the correct opinion to have, but it's so easy to slip into not even like unproductive cynicism, but just like you know, almost like a realistic cynicism to yourself, but like needing to take a step back and see things in the positive way, a
Yeah.
constructive way they probably should be, right?
Yeah, and I get that because, like, you know, I've been talking about Palestine since like, you know, 2020,
Mm-hmm.
and I think a lot of people, especially like after like October 7th, like got a lot of shit for talking about Palestine. Like, I knew immediately, like on October 7th, I knew immediately that there was going to be like um, a terrible, terrible backlash towards the Palestinian people. And I got like, and I think a lot of people were upset because just like me, like we got a lot of shit. Like I had an old friend of mine who I didn't even realize was a Zionist, like basically like calling me a terrorist, like a Hamas supporter, you know. And I mean, at the end of the day, like, you know, if you're, you know, if you're going to vote for the lesser of two evils, like Hamas is the lesser of two evils, you know, you can't deny that. But yeah, a lot of condom hummus talk, like a lot of that happening. So I feel like a lot of people felt like they earned the right to like be an advocate for Palestinians. So, and I think some people, you know, kind of like fell into a very comfortable, like liberal, like stance about it. It's very easy to do, especially if you've been
Mm-hmm.
through like a lot when it comes to like advocating for the
Mhm.
Palestinian people the past 8 months. But yeah, it's good to just like to be reminded, like you know what exactly, like why it's helpful, and like and why your advocacy, no matter like how much I mean, hopefully like people start to learn more about what's happening over
Right.
there, but like
That's the hope. Yeah.
right, like all is welcome, like everyone all is welcome to be an advocate for the Palestinian people.
Yep. 1,000% correct. Next track, Ursula.
Mm.
What was the inspiration behind that one?
Ursula was named after Ursula K. Le Guin. I think I'm saying her name right, the author, and it's kind of like a song about like the polarity between the one who is very cynical about where we are heading towards politically and as human beings, and the impulse to like be a doomer, and
Mhm.
the notion of revolutionary optimism. And the song is about that, really. Like the song is about like this conversation with myself, essentially, where it's like, what's the point? One side of me is like, well, what's the fucking point? Like, do we, going back to wanting to be a mom, like, do I really want to bring a child into this world and experience this world right now? Is it, and it's even falling in love, like, is that even appropriate? And then, the other aspect of me is like, oh yeah, hell yeah. Like, you know what? Like, we only have a finite amount of time in this world. You know, we have to at least like live our life in a way that's fulfilling, as much as we can. Not to say that like be incredibly selfish with your life, but like ultimately at the end of the day, like you got to do what makes you happy ultimately.
Well, and if you don't do that, how long are you going to go with your advocacy or your activism before you completely burn out and become, like you said, cynical, which is at the end of the day the people that you're trying to fight against, or the system, that's what they want you to do, right? Like
Exactly.
people, people a lot of times use this for on the concept of voting, but it's actually on the concept of like actual advocacy, activism, and trying to make the world a better place and more fair
Right.
place. Is like they're not trying to, a lot of times they're not trying to engage you to learn a new, the different ideology or to go to the status quo. They're trying to get you to opt out of the system, which is so easy to do when you see the reality of what's going on, right?
Right.
So that's something that the whole revolutionary optimism thing is something I struggle with. I'm often so cynical, but just you have to fight against it, because like even if you can just view it as like, I can't let those fuckers win, like
Right.
that's a powerful thing to remember.
Yeah. And it's like, even though, Ursula is, an anarchist, she I think a quote that like I've heard I've heard a lot that I really love by her is what is I'm gonna butcher it. Capitalism. Ooh, I should probably just have it pulled up. Do you have it
Go
pulled
and
up?
pull it up here. I'll pull it up here real quick.
Where she says like capitalism, it may seem inescapable, but so do the divine rights of kings. I think that's roughly the
Let's see. Yeah, she said, "We live in capitalism. Power seems inescapable, but then so do the divine right of kings."
yeah,
Yeah, yeah. That. Yep. Um,
which is true,
that's a good thing to remember, right? Because like
right?
at some point, it's like the whole, for better or for worse, the socialism or barbarism thing. It's like something's going to change. Might not, you got to
Right,
be careful to not believe that whole thing of like the future always heads towards justice. That's a naive way of thinking, but things are going to change. Just whether
right,
at some point there's a breaking point.
right. And it's like you have to like continue your advocacy, like you just have to, because it's
Hmm.
like I think I can't remember who said it, but it's like being a leftist means being right first. And being a leftist is not very popular, like it's in the sense that
Hmm.
like you have to always like advocate, you always have to have like you'd always have to like have a very steadfast principle, you because like ultimately you are doing what is just, you are doing what is right, even if many people don't believe that, even if the antithesis is in power. You just have to keep pushing on. And it's like I think the quote at the end of the song is like, gotta sow seeds for trees, so that the children in the future can bask in its shade, And also like the Lennon quote at the end, which is,
Mhm.
there are decades where nothing happens, and there are weeks where decades happen. So,
Mhm.
you know,
God, it's such a good quote.
yeah,
But yeah, again, fantastic song and great message there as well. And also, I haven't said this enough as we've been going through, but the song itself musically, as you know, because I always do this, I just dive into the lyrics because I love it when people are thoughtful lyrically. But like the song itself is just absolutely fantastic as well, which helps, right? So,
yeah,
so
it's very
uh,
heavy. I wanted it to be
yeah,
very
yeah,
heavy. Yeah.
yeah,
And,
I love
and
that. And again,
also, fun fact:
go ahead.
my friend Lise from the band Filth is Eternal is the one that's screaming towards the end of that song. So if you're
Oh,
a
so
fan of
sick.
Filth is Eternal, any of you Filthy is Eternal, shout out to that band and your fans. There's a
Awesome.
little Easter egg in there for you.
Yeah, that's sick. Last song, Rain. Can you tell me the inspirations for this one? You know, whether you want to go the musical route or lyrics,
Yeah,
everything in between.
I mean, yeah, Rainy is just like it's an instrumental. It's like a
Yeah.
meditative
Sorry, I
stance.
knew that. I'm sorry.
Yeah,
But
there
but
are
yeah,
there
I
are
guess
vocals in it. Yeah,
yeah.
and
Um,
those vocals, those lyrics will remain a secret.
I love it. I
Yeah,
love the art the artsiness of the obscurity. It's I'm a
yeah,
big fan of that stuff like that.
yeah.
Um,
Rainy is like the epilogue of the record. It's supposed to be a vibe. It's supposed to kind of like trickle down, like a little waterfall, little raindrops. It's
yeah,
very inspired by like like neoclassical composers, and yeah, it's called Rainy because it's kind of a callback to where I'm from, Seattle, and I'm
it's also a
using
callback to April as well, right?
right.
So there you go. Yeah.
And in a way, like you can listen to the record on repeat, and it kind of goes through that cycle because like the first song April like starts with like the wind chimes, so like
Hmm.
it's kind of like reminiscent to what it's like living in Los Angeles, where we have spring, we have summer, we have fall, but we don't have winter, and that to
Yeah.
me is very idealistic. So it's like the record skips winter. So yeah,
Not a big fan of snow and you know, sub-zero temperatures and all that.
I
It's not
mean,
your favorite.
I used to be. When you live in Seattle, you that shit like
You guys get crazy. You guys get crazy snow at certain point, or
well,
where you were, right?
right.
Or no, right?
Well, specifically, it's a city that's not built for that weather. There's not infrastructure for snow. So
Hmm.
when it snows, the entire city shuts down. Like there's
Hmm.
there's a lot of compilations where people try to drive on icy roads and like crash into each other because the city doesn't have money for snowplow. It doesn't have like the money to essentially like a lot of Midwestern cities have, where
Right.
when it snows up to your knee, like there's at least somebody in the city like making sure that like people are a lot safer in the snow. It's a lot more. Yeah, and Seattle doesn't have that, so yeah, it just becomes like a big pain in the ass when it snows in Seattle.
Yeah, it's funny. Not to end the conversation on the record here on weather of all things. That's
Oh,
usually
that's
what you
fine. Yeah,
start
yeah.
off a conversation with, right? But it is funny in that front of like, you know, I live in northern Illinois, and so you know, say yeah, we'll get like 8 inches of snow. You know, but as long as it's done by 2 a.m., the roads are plowed in time for you to go to work, which I kind of hate. You know, I'd kind of like to
Right,
have a snow day, right?
right.
But it's funny. You know, I'm an educator, and so some of my friends that have or people I've known like will work in Kentucky, say, or a southern state, and they'll get like the smallest amount of snow on the ground, and the school shuts down for like a week, right? And people will joke about that here, but it's like, yeah, you don't understand that like we have this whole infrastructure set in place for this stuff,
Right.
like so many other states, whether it's I didn't realize that about Seattle. That's really interesting. But like whether it's like a Seattle or like a southern state, they get some snow. It's like they don't have salt. The roads aren't even made for this kind of thing. Like potholes, like just like sprout up like weeds everywhere the second it happens, like all this kind of stuff to where like, no, they actually maybe should shut down with like a quarter inch of snow. You know what
Right.
I mean?
Yeah.
It's a funny thing for me to remember when like I kind of scoff at that stuff. But I digress again. Fantastic record.
Thank you so much.
everything, everything from, again, the lyrical deep dive we just did kind of can give a lot of people an idea of what the songs and like what you're going for with the record are overall about, but also like very, very eclectic, right? Like very eclectic musically, which goes a lot with like all the different influences you've been talking about. So I really encourage anyone listening to this that has not heard the record before. Again, this will be coming out the week when the record comes out, August 9th. Definitely worth a check out. And I love that you took the time to deep dive this with me. I really appreciate it.
Yeah, thanks for having me. I'm definitely a fan of the podcast, and it's been a thrill being a part of it. And yeah, thank you for having me.
I really appreciate that. That means a lot. Last two things I'll ask you before we kind of cut off from the recording here is just kind of tell people, again, this will be out in August, so you can tell people where people can find you, find your music, find, all that good stuff. And then I always play a song at the end. So obviously it won't have to be one of the ones you released previously. You could pick, one that you're most proud of, one that you think will be a deep cut, whatever in between. But yeah, just share where people can find you and tell us what song you want to play at the end.
Yeah, my name is Sasha Bolof. You can find me, I guess, on Bandcamp at sashabolof.bandcamp.com. I'm on Cruisin' Records. You can find me there. If you search me on Instagram, you can find me there as well as Twitter. My Twitter activity isn't as huge. I'm mostly just on there to lurk. I don't really post on Twitter. I'm not a Twitter poster, unfortunately.
Yeah, it's a brain disease. Don't do it. Yeah.
I mean, I wish I would have became an early Twitter poster. I tried, but like nothing of mine ever.
My account got nuked this year. So
yeah. Well, hey, it could be worse. It could be like a Blue Sky poster, right?
Right. Yeah, I think I have an account there. I haven't checked it in months. I'm pretty sure I had like 7 followers on there. It was not worth my time.
Yeah, I tried it too. It's like, nah, this ain't for me. But those are the main places that you can find me. As far as a song to play out, you can pick. I'll give you reign for that.
Man, I'm usually a pretty big stickler on making the guest pick, but you've been awesome. Yeah. So I'll do it, and I'm gonna go with, because we just discussed it, and I'm into the heavy music, and we're gonna end this on a positive note, so to speak, with the revolutionary optimism.
Yeah,
we'll go with Ursula.
Hell yeah.
I'll put that one, because that one, I have to go back. Like, I'm gonna have to go back, especially when June gets re-added to this. I'm gonna have to go back and re-listen to pick my favorite. But like, I listened through it again right before we came on, like on my commute. And like, gun to my head, I think that'd be my favorite one on there as of now. So awesome. We'll go with Ursula. And again, all those things that you just listed will be in the notes as well for anybody listening, whether you're watching on YouTube or listening on all the platforms. And Sasha, thanks so much for doing this. I really appreciate your time.
Thank you so much. Thank you for having me.
of the hemlock. There are decades where nothing happens, and there are weeks where decades happen. Sowing seeds in hopes that the children of the future will finally bask in its shade long after we're gone.